Hello, Professor Toybox here, along with Princess Jasmine, and today I'm putting the finishing touches on my Agrabah Palace Dungeon toy box. I've got a bunch of little things I need to do to wrap up this toy box, so let's get started. 2 episodes ago, in episode 31, I added 2 Asgard townsperson doors, one there and one down there, and I hooked those up to a replayer, each of them, to generate a mattress down there and some clouds up here so we could get to that rope. And the reason we needed that was so that the player can get up to this room. And so this is the first area we're going to hook up today. And as we look out over this room, it overlooks the main chamber. And there are 3 platforms across the way that we need to lower. And I've already taken the liberty of creating the paths and moving the platforms up against the ceiling. And that's all I've done here so far, and dropped the button over here and placed that. And the placement of that isn't quite as important as long as it's facing out this way so the player can see what the button does. But we're going to come over to the properties for each of the path creators. Come down here, and I'm going to set these up so it's active. The speed is fine. The only thing we need to change here is to turn off the auto start flag. And we're going to do that on each of these. And one more. Okay. And then we'll come up to the platform, new path connection, and we'll connect it to the path. And it doesn't move because it's actually positioned right where it needs to be. So we'll come in there now and come down to properties. And everything here is fine. I just want to change the movement style to one way and stop. And we'll do that for each of these platforms. So new path connection, connect it to the path, and set the property to change the movement style. And I probably could have done this one time, so you didn't have to watch me do this 3 times. So I set up a lot of stuff here ahead of time to try to save a little bit of time, but I overlooked this one. Fortunately, this goes pretty quick. Okay, so now all 3 of those bridges are connected to their paths. And then we're going to come over to the button. I'm going to do a new logic connection when pressed, and we'll come over to the first bridge under Toybox path and say start. And we'll do that for the other 2 as well. And this will lower those bridges in place so the player can get across this area of the toy box. New logic connection when pressed. And start. And because I'll need to reset this after I test it, we'll come out over to our reset button over here. And do a new logic connection when pressed. And come up to each of the bridges and do a reset and stop. And this reset button, of course, we put down a number of episodes ago. So if you're just joining us for this series, I kind of recommend you go back and start watching from there, and then you won't be lost as we're working here. By the time you get to this point in the series, it'll all make sense. That's the one we haven't hooked up yet. Okay. So then when the player reaches this point, they can come over this way and push the button, and that lowers the platforms in place. So that's good. And then just to make sure everything's in the right state, I'm going to come out over here and we'll go hit that reset button. Oops, turned around again. There we go. Okay, so that little part is done. Now throughout this toy box I've moved a lot of the Creativitoys already down below the terrain to get them out of the way. I have not done these, and basically all I'm doing is just selecting it in Spark mode, and you look at the menu in the lower right, and on my Wii U I press B and just move this down below the terrain and drop it. But these toys here, I don't want to do that. I'm going to set up a little command center, and then that way I have that to be able to operate if I need to come in here. And so this little platform, I'm going to drop the reset button over here, and that's right next to the entrance. And we'll also move the level starter and the button for that over here as well. And I could move the level starter below the terrain, but I kind of want to leave that over here. Excuse me. Next to the button it goes with, so I remember what this button does. Otherwise, I'm going to forget which button is which. So that will kick off the level starter. This will reset. So as I play through this level, if I find a problem or there's something I need to do, I've got a little command center here where I can hop out here and hit the reset button, fix whatever needs to be fixed and save, and then press the button here to resume. Okay, so back to the main chamber. We've now hooked up these 3 bridge pieces so that the player can get across and up. The ledge hangs up to this chamber, and this is where we're going to work next. And this room is pretty much done, except there's a couple of issues I want to address. First, if a player dies here, they're going to start over down there at the beginning of the dungeon, and they got a long way to go to get back up here. So the first thing I want to do is in the Creativitoys drawer, I'm going to put down a checkpoint. And I'm going to put this down with the red little dot there in the upper left corner of this as I place it. And that way the player will be facing that direction when they respawn. And I'm going to come into the properties for this. And really there's not a whole lot I need to do here. None is fine. Individual players is fine. Available for all. The only thing I want to do is make this hidden so that the player doesn't see it. And that way, if they start across here and they die, they'll respawn back at this point. So that's a very simple little fix. Now the second issue in this room involves the key that's going to go on the platform on the other side. And the problem here is that if the player picks up that key and dies on the way back, the key will drop into the lava. And so we need to put the key back if the player dies. And so for that we're going to use a replayer, and I added a new replayer out here. So I'm going to step on that, which opens the menu in the lower right, and I'll press B on my Wii U to start recording, and then I'll step off so I can get back into the editor. And the key is in the gameplay toys drawer, and I was on that at one point, but it moved me when I did something else prior to starting this video, so I'll have to scroll right to get there. And there's our key. And so I want to put this key down on this tower. And we'll drop it right here towards the back of the tower. And then I'll exit. And I'll step back on the replayer to open that menu again. Stop recording. And I'm going to leave the key there. I can press A to clear just to make sure it works. And then Y to play it back. But there we go. We've got our key. So now we have a way to put it back if something happens. And on this replayer, I'm going to go ahead and set the properties to change the playback interval to 0. Now for the logic for putting it back, we're going to need a number of toys. I'm going to go ahead and move this replayer out here with the rest of the toys that I need. And what we're going to need is a victory tracker, and I've already put these down to save a little time. A victory tracker and a defeat manager, and a logic gate, and a time delayer. And so the victory tracker will be the thing that kicks this off, and so on that we'll do a new logic connection. When defeated, player any. So when any player is defeated, we're going to come over to this logic gate and do an input. And I'm using the logic gate because I don't want this logic to work all of the time. If the player dies somewhere else in the toy box, I don't need to worry about this key. It's only when they're up here in this room that I've got to worry about this key. And so I'm going to pass that through this logic gate, which I can open and close. So it'll only be open when they're up in that area, and it'll be closed the rest of the time. And so on this logic gate then, we'll do a new logic connection on output. I want to come over to the replayer and clear it, which will take the key out of the environment. So if it's sitting down in the lava, that'll take it back out. And then I need to put the key back, but the replayer needs a little bit of time in order to be able to clear itself before I can do a playback on it again. And so that's why we have the time delayer. And so for that, I'm going to come into the properties, and I'm going to set the delay time. 1 second doesn't always seem to be enough, at least on my Wii U. So I'm going to set it to be 2 seconds. And that should be fine because it takes a couple of seconds for the player to respawn. And so on the logic gate, in addition to clearing the replayer, we're going to do a new logic connection on output. We'll come over to the time delayer and start the delay. And on the time delayer, new logic connection, when delay is completed, we'll come over to the replayer and do the playback. And so that will take the key out of the environment, and then 2 seconds later put it back in the environment, in the place where it originally was, up on top of the tower. And so that's good. Now, I've got the defeat manager out here because I just wanted to change one little setting, and you don't necessarily need this, but I like to keep playing as the same player, so I want to make sure I turn off that figure revival required property. And that way if I die, I can keep playing as whatever player that I am. That's just a personal preference. You don't necessarily need that. Okay, so that puts the key back. Now, the issue is opening and closing this gate. And again, I want to do that when I want to open the gate when the player is in this area. And when they leave this area, I want to close that gate and not have them worry about it. And I could put some big, huge, long trigger area in here, but that might make things a little bit tricky if I happen to want to make some changes. And so another way to do this, you could use 2 trigger areas. Oops, too far. And again, I could use a single trigger area and just fill that whole region. But I'm going to go ahead and just use 2, and you can decide which way works best for you. So I'm going to move this over and put the first trigger area here. And the second trigger area we'll put out on this corner. And with that little dot, I'll put it over on that side. And that way I only have to move one of these little things to resize. So there we go. We've got two different trigger areas. And for this one, when they come into this trigger area and they're getting ready to go across that rail slide, at this point we'll go ahead and make sure that gate is open. So we'll do when entered by player any. I want to come open this gate. And by the way, that gate should be closed when we enter the level. So let's come over to our level starter. Because again, I don't want to do this behavior except when they're up in this room. So on the level starter, new logic connection on catalyze. We'll come over to the logic gate and close it. And then when they get up here and they pass through this trigger area, we'll open that gate up. So then if they come through here and they end up dying, then they'll not only respawn back at this checkpoint, but it'll put the key back. And then we'll use this one for when they leave the area. And so on this particular trigger area, we'll do a new logic connection when entered by player any. We'll come over and close the gate. And that works because as they're entering this area for the first time and they come up these ledge hangs and pass through this trigger area, it's going to close that gate, but the gate's already closed. So that's fine. There's no side effect from that that's bad. And then when they pass through this one, it opens it. They go through the rail slide and do their business and come back. And then pass through here again, which the gate's already open, so that's not a problem. And when they pass through here, it'll close the gate. Now this gets a little messed up if you have two players, because you could have your second player sitting back here, and they could end up closing that gate. So there's pros and cons to each of these techniques. Putting one trigger area into this whole thing might be the better solution. But if you're just doing a single player, this will work. So I'm just going to go ahead and do it that way. And I think that'll work just fine. So let's see, we've got the victory tracker. All of these different things are hooked up. So yeah, so this area is pretty much done. Okay, so once they've got the key, they're going to come down here and open up the locked cage here, which is holding a button. And I've added that button in there, and that button is going to open these double doors. And I've already placed the double doors here again to save a little bit of time. I've got them highlighted so you can see how I've placed them. But you'll notice they don't go all the way up to the ceiling. And so first thing we'll do is I'm going to come back down to the blocks drawer and put a couple of blocks in there just to make sure the player can't slip through here without opening this door. And I'm going to line it up with the block above it. And we'll put two of those down. And that plugs that hole. And so for the button, we're going to do a new logic connection when pressed. We'll come over here and open the door. And making that logic connection means these doors will now be closed. They will not open automatically when the player walks through here. And so pushing that button is the only way to open those doors. Now if the player is over here pushing that button, they can't see those doors. And so we're going to need to put in a camera. So we'll come back up to the Creativitoys drawer. And I'm going to go left, and I'm looking for the target camera. And we'll put this on the floor. centered in front of those doors. And I've already dropped a locator over there. I'm going to connect this up to that locator. So that will be the camera target. And for the camera properties, start transition is fine. Let's see, we're going to turn on define duration, and I think 3 seconds should be enough. Follow, cut, player viewport, I'm going to set to all players, so all of the players can see this. Glow through is fine. Camera target needs to be the connected locator, and the rest of these settings are all fine. And so on the button, actually, I'm going to go ahead and delete this link that I just made to the double door. And I'll explain why in a moment. Let me first connect up to the camera. So when the button is pressed, we'll go and set the camera. Now, if I had that connected to the door, then all the camera is going to show me is the open door, because by the time the camera activates, the door is already going to be open. And so I need to use a time delayer in here because I want to actually see the door opening. I think that would be good for the player. And so we're going to come over here and pick up another time delayer. And I'll set that right here. And I think the 1 second delay on this is probably fine. So on the button, we'll do a new logic connection when pressed. Come over to the time delayer and start the delay. And on the time delayer, new logic connection when the delay is completed. Then we'll come over and open the door. And I like that a little bit better. I think that will work a lot easier. You'll actually see the door opening versus, oh, there's an open door. So I want the player to see that that's what that button does. So let's go ahead and hook up our reset button over here. So new logic connection when pressed. Because I want to test out this door. So we'll do a close on the door for the reset button. And then I think I can put myself in this cage without actually opening it up. Let's try that. Yep, there we go. So now Jasmine pushes the button after she gets the key and opens the cage. And we can actually see the door in its closed state, and we see it opening. So I like that. Let's come back out over here to the command center. Where did it put me? Oh, there we go. Over here. We'll go ahead and close that door back up. And the door is closed. Okay. Now, I think at this point we can go ahead and hook up the enemy wave generators. And again, to save some time, I've already placed locators for these, and I've hooked them up. So on this enemy wave generator, it's connected to locators that you can see around the chamber, and also one over here in this lava chamber, this locator here. And again, all I've done there is place these toys and connect them up with the new locator connection. And then to save time, I've also configured the wave, and I've got 5 Agrabah guards on this enemy wave generator. And the properties are set like you see here. Off, off, no delay, off, off, none. On the other side of the chamber, I've got another enemy wave generator, and this one is connected up to the locators you see here. And the placement of these really isn't all that important. It's just you want to spread them out throughout the chamber. And there's one up here on the tower that it's also connected to. And for this wave generator, I've got 4 Agrabah guards. And the properties are set the same way as the other one. So I've got 9 guards total, 8 in this chamber and 1 being placed over in that chamber. And to generate these, I'm going to hook up to this locking gate here near the entrance. So the very first trap, the fire trap, as soon as the player opens this gate with the key, we'll have a new logic connection set up here. When the gate is opened, I'm going to come into this wave generator and generate the wave. And I'm going to do the same thing with the other one. New logic connection when the locking gate wall is opened. We'll come and generate that wave. And it's always a good idea, hook up our reset button out here. New logic connection when pressed. Go ahead and defeat those waves. That takes the enemies out. So I don't have to battle them all. And they're not in the way when I'm trying to make changes. So when the reset button's pressed, we'll do a defeat wave on the other as well. And that is it for the main chamber. Everything is hooked up here and ready to go. And we've already got trigger areas over here and over here for the enemy wave generators in this large chamber. We did that in an earlier video, so there's nothing to do there. One thing I do want to do, though, is this little room back here is kind of empty. And so I'm going to put a couple of spinning traps in here. That's in the platforming toys drawer. We're going to put some rotating spikes in. And I'm going to set one of them up over here. And another one here. So that gives a little something in here for the player to do if they choose to come through this way to get into this chamber. And so with that, now this chamber is done also. Now the last area we need to work on is the back stairway here up to Jafar's tower. So when they open this door and they come through here and start up the stairs, we need some enemies here. And I'm going to put down a trigger area. So I'll come back to the Creativitoys drawer and go find the trigger area. I could do this when that time delayer goes off and opens the door, but if there's other enemies still in the toy box, I'd rather wait until the player actually is ready to come through here. And so on this trigger area, when they pass through here, we'll generate the enemies. And I've put down 2 locators here. And up over here, I've also placed 2 more locators in those positions. And I've hooked them up to an enemy wave generator over here. And I've configured the wave with 4 Agrabah guards. And again, the properties are set up the same as those other ones we looked at. And so we'll come over to the trigger area that I just put down, and we'll do a new logic connection when entered by player any. We'll come over to this enemy wave generator and generate the wave. And that'll put 2 enemies here and 2 up at the top of the stairs. Okay, a couple other little things that I just thought of. I want to put down a couple of treasure chests because I haven't done that yet. So this chamber, I lied, this chamber isn't quite done yet. We're missing the treasure chest here. a little reward for the player coming this way. And for the loot on this, we'll have this one do a special move capsule, and you can set this to be whatever you want. Health capsule or a sidekick gear or something. And the other one we need is out over here on this platform. Otherwise, there's really no reason for the player to go to those locations. And under here, for the loot on this, I'll just do the same thing. All right. And that's pretty much it. The only other thing we got to do is move these creativitoys down underneath the terrain out of the way. And I'll let you do that same thing on your own for these enemy wave generators that we added here and here. The last thing we have to do is put on the ceiling. And now this becomes an interesting exercise. You have a couple of options for how you want to do this. And probably the most nice looking way to do it is to come down to Building Sets Group 6, and actually it might be quicker just to pick one of these up and put it back down. You can use these for the ceiling, and it has a nice brick texture underneath that goes really well. The problem with that, though, is when you're covering a large area like this with these blocks, that's going to add to the lag, because we've already used a lot of these blocks to build the walls. And so putting all of these down for the ceiling as well can cause a problem. For certain areas, like the entrance down here, it's not really a problem because there's not a lot here. And so we can come down and just kind of cover this area up. And we don't have a whole lot of walls here, a whole lot of building pieces for those walls. And so having multiple building pieces there for the ceiling isn't a problem. And it actually looks pretty nice. So when you come into the toy box, you've got kind of a nice rocky ceiling there, and I like that. But again, when you get to those other larger rooms, that doesn't always work. And so an alternative, if you can try it with those blocks, and if you run into a lot of lag, then you can take them back out and put in a larger block. And you can use a terrain block, for example, something like this. So you might use one of these for the ceiling, and it'll cover a large area. And if you do that, then I'd recommend styling this to be the same as the Pirates theme, the buried treasures that we were using for the floor. And of course you have to put down enough pieces to completely cover the ceiling. So we'll add in a couple of these. There's a little bit of a gap over here, so I'll have to cover that up. And so now if we come out over here, and we'll come into the main chamber here, just so I don't end up on the roof. And now when you look at that, that's not a bad looking ceiling either. It's kind of a more natural looking ceiling, but it works. So those are your two options, I think. And you can play around with some of the other textures if you want. But yeah, just be aware of lag if you're putting down too many of those. The other thing to be aware of too is as you're filling in ceiling areas, you want to make sure you look for gaps in the walls. And so if we come up here to that last set of stairs going up to Jafar's tower, you'll notice there's some gaps here underneath that wall and underneath this one. So as you're filling in the ceiling areas for places below, like this, you kind of want to just watch for gaps like that and make sure you plug them. And now this is going to leave a gap over here if I don't put some blocks along here. And that was the that was the hole underneath there. So we got to have a block underneath this. And you can see this piece overlaps the block underneath. So there's no gap there. So that's good. But anyway, you're just going to come through and fill in the ceiling. And I'll leave that as an exercise to you. One thing to watch out for, of course, is when you're filling in the ceiling for like these stairs, you're probably going to want to make sure that you can actually get down behind that and you're not touching the stairs when you put this in, because then it makes it impossible for the player to get through there. And here we can kind of move this over a little bit to straddle that opening so I don't have to use two blocks. Anyway, so there you go. Just fill in the ceiling and you're all done. So with that, the palace dungeon is finished. Next time we'll move on to the third toy box in my Aladdin adventure, the desert region. It'll be a week or so before I get to that video though, because I'm in the process of making a few improvements and I need a little time to finish that up. But when I'm ready, then I'll play through the entire desert toy box and we'll use the scarab that we recovered from Jafar's tower to find and open the Cave of Wonders. Until then, I want to thank you for watching, and I hope you're enjoying this series so far. If nothing else, I hope the economy system, the satellite receiver, and the trap-based gameplay that you've seen have helped inspire some fresh new ideas for things you can do in your own toy boxes. There's still plenty more to come in this series, so I hope you'll stick around for the rest of it. On that note, I encourage you to subscribe to my channel or sign up to follow me on my blog if you haven't already done that, so you'll know when the next episode airs. And if you want to build this adventure on your own console or PC, be sure to check out my blog where you'll find floor plans and logic diagrams to help you out. Until next time, take care.